How do you know if some of your relationship issues could be due to your husband's past childhood trauma? A traumatic childhood leaves profound marks on a person's emotional health, and the coping mechanisms that they used to survive their childhood can show up in adult relationships. So let's discuss how you can navigate this journey with empathy and understanding. But before I get to that, I do want to talk about how men in particular disclose childhood abuse at a much greater age than women do. There may be situations out there where you suspect that your husband has experienced childhood trauma, but that your husband has not been able to express this to you or talk to you about it. So what do we know about disclosure? The average age that men disclose, particularly childhood sexual abuse, is an average age of 52 years old. Men are the least likely to report being assaulted, though they make up 10% of all victims. Most sexual abuse of males begins before puberty, typically around 10 years old. Between 70 and 90% of males who have been sexually abused report not telling anyone at the time. And males disclose being sexually abused in childhood on average 22 years after the assault, 10 years later than females. Men report first in-depth discussion 28 years after the sexual abuse, and the first helpful discussion 30 years later. And that can lead to many relationships where you are in patterns that you don't understand. You as a spouse not knowing this history can be confused. You can begin to doubt your own sanity before the full picture comes into surface. These statistics show us that there may be a lot of us out there who our spouses have had a traumatic childhood and we just don't know about it. So I want to talk about the signs that you can look for that may indicate that there was some childhood trauma and that some of those patterns that you're seeing could be due to that. My story began 13 years ago when I married my dream guy on a beach in Kauai. We had a stepdaughter and we were looking forward to having more children. And that was when I started to notice some things that I just didn't understand. So I started to notice, first of all, that my husband had a terrible insomnia. That means that he was sleeping anywhere other than our bed, and also was getting maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep. And after I started to notice the insomnia, I was noticing a really strong need to control his environment. So things that looked very compulsive as far as where the blinds were placed or how long our showers were. Things like this started to actually become quite a problem in our relationship. And then I noticed a lot of emotional responses that I just did not understand. Things that I thought were very normal things to ask my husband, like taking out the garbage or putting away the dishes after dinner, would result in really heated arguments. Those were some of the things that I noticed, and it was only when things got too much that my husband was finally able to reveal a terrible history of childhood abuse at the hands of the Catholic Church. At first, I was really excited to have something that we could work on, something that I could put my fingers on that were reasons for the things that I was seeing. But what I quickly learned was that this was something that got worse before it got better. And there was a lot that my husband and I had to learn and heal before things got better. Now, fast forwarding 13 years, my husband and I are now in a happy and healthy relationship. We have been able to heal from the past, and we want to help others who are in the same situation. I was looking everywhere for resources for spouses, especially of male trauma, and I could find very little. And I want to create a community of women so that we can stop suffering in silence and we can start to talk about how trauma affects relationships. So, what are these signs that may indicate that a traumatic past is causing some of the patterns and behaviors that you're seeing in your marriage? One sign is for you to look back Does your husband skip over conversations about their childhood? Do they say things like, oh, things were very normal, or things were fine, or just avoid the conversation altogether? This could be a sign that there is just something in the past that they don't want to let you in on yet. Control is another avenue that survivors use to cope with their abuse. And this is control that makes a person feel safe. So when survivors were abused as children, they had no control over what happened to them. And as adults, they use control to protect themselves. So many survivors will want to control the flow of the relationship. They may carefully manipulate the dynamics, such as how close they get to you and what you think of them. Maybe they limit how often you see one another or when. They want to control how the relationship works in order to put themselves in a position where they perceive they can't be harmed physically, emotionally, financially, or otherwise. Other survivors don't use any of these outlets and instead just push people away. When you try to go deeper in a relationship, they pull back. When you reach inside to see what's there, they evaporate like vapor, never allowing you near enough to truly see their vulnerable side. You may see extreme emotional reactions, things that routine parents or other couples can work through, can become very heated arguments. They often feel like they haven't been heard, or they don't like feeling that they're being blamed. And these are all stemming from the abuse, where they have guilt for the abuse that occurred to them. And in some cases, if their disclosure was discounted, they may feel that nobody listens to them. You may also notice withdrawal. And this is almost a dissociative symptom involving some sort of psychological retreat, where the survivor disconnects from their surroundings and even themselves. This is different than just needing a break after a fight. This is what I call a flip of the switch, where all of a sudden there is this retreat that nothing that you can do or say will bring them out of. Obsessive compulsive tendencies can also be a response to that loss of control that we talked about earlier, that when the abuse was occurring, they had no control over their situation, so they may want to control their environment. Other things that may happen is depression, anxiety, the use of mind-altering substances is all much greater in men who have experienced trauma in their childhood. It's important to note that all of these signs can be attributed to other factors as well, and only a professional will be able to diagnose with certainty. But knowing and seeing some of these patterns as a spouse can help you try to figure out how you can deal with these in a healthier way. So what can you do if you suspect that there's a possibility that childhood trauma is creating some of the behaviors that you're seeing? The first thing would be to try having a conversation and approaching it with empathy and understanding. There is often an overwhelming feeling of shame by a male who has experienced childhood trauma. They would rather take the secret to the grave with them than tell anyone about it. So having these conversations may need to occur over and over again, just letting them know that you will always love them, no matter what has happened to them in the past, that you can handle the truth no matter what it is, and that you will be there if he is ready to talk. This requires a lot of patience, and unfortunately, there is nothing that you can do to make this process go any faster. Your job is to create a safe environment for your husband to tell. But what I want you to know is that I don't want you to lose yourself in this process as a supporter of someone who has experienced childhood trauma, or if you suspect that your husband has experienced childhood trauma. You can't lose yourself. Your experience as the partner of a male survivor is different from that of other partners. This is not something that scheduling date nights and finding your love language will fix. You've probably had crises of faith, anger at your spouse, anger at the abuser, issues with extended family, and these are things that we cannot put a Band-Aid on and pretend that everything is okay. We have to bring these issues to the surface and confront them head on. Even without disclosure, there are things you can start doing today to gain more control through the chaos. There is an enormous demand for us to start discussing and dealing with this and stop being silent. And that is what this blog is all about. So if this is you and some of this resonates with you, I want you to check out my website. I have some free resources for spouses and partners of male survivors that are experiencing some of these unhealthy patterns and are struggling in their relationship. There are things that you can do that you can start today to start moving towards a healthier and happier relationship.